And welcome back to another daily devotion. I am Pastor Roy here at Woodlawn Christian Church in Lake City, Iowa, and this devotion is for Tuesday, February 20th of 2024. We are in the Gospel of Mark, and today we're going to wrap up chapter 9. We're looking at verses 42 to 50 today. And 42 and 50 kind of refer back to, it would seem, there would be a little bit of an indication to verse 37. We had 38 through 41 that we talked about yesterday. But on Friday, and we ended up, the end of that was, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives not me, but him who sent me. Talking about the children, the importance of the children. And this verse, the verses here, 42, starts off with, whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin. So are they referring back to those children we talked about in verse 37? Or is it referring to those that are new in the faith, perhaps some believe, or is it referring to all people, all human beings, because we're all children of God? Good question. You decide for yourself. I kind of think it's talking about not necessarily the people in 37, the little children, but those that are young in the faith, those that, but it also could apply because they're young children. They're young in the faith too, so it does apply to them. So with that, point to warn you, depending on what translation you're reading, you might have two verses. I do not have. You may have verse 48, which is where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. That might be repeated two more times than what I have. That is a verse that is in those two extra places in some manuscripts, but most, and what they rank as the best, there's a way to rank, the ones that are the most reliable, perhaps we should say, manuscripts, they're not there. So those are some verses that are, if you will, have been, maybe were added for emphasis, or somebody got confused, what have you. There's debate on why that is. At any rate, it doesn't change the meaning of this section of text, whether you have it one time or you have it three times. It's there, and we get the point, so to say. The other thing I want to point out here is Jesus says hell here several times. Uses the word hell several times. And whenever Jesus is quoted as saying hell, he's using the word Gehenna. He's using that is a place name. That is an actual physical place in the Valley of Hanan, the Hanan Valley. It was this place outside of Jerusalem, where when the Jewish people fell away and started worshiping various different kings and such. If you look at the history of Israel, some of them went away from the being monotheistic and were worshiping different gods, one of which would be Baal. And during those times, there were various altars set up in that valley, and those were altars where they did human sacrifices. They sacrificed children. Children sacrifices. So he's talking about little ones here. You're leading those little ones astray. You're taking them in and killing them. Perhaps that's part of what's going on here. That we don't know. Certainly could be part of that. But the point is, this is a place that the Israelite people despised it because it was an unclean place. It had been used for pagan worship. So they turned it into the garbage dump. At the time of Jesus, it was the place where they threw away their garbage, and if there were unclaimed bodies that weren't buried, well, I guess what, they got thrown into the garbage pit along with everything. Maybe somebody was crucified or killed by the Romans or whoever was occupying at that time, or if for whatever reason they wanted to really disgrace the person. At any rate, there were bodies, there were things, junk, what have you, everything thrown in there. And it was burnt, as many, if you grew up in a small town, I can remember the Reliance back at home, the garbage dump being on fire at different times. They would burn it, and a lot of times when you have garbage dumps like that, they smolder, and for a very long period of time you have smoldering, so the fire does not go out, and there's worms there and everything eating. It's a very despicable, it's a very depressing place. It's a place that, because of its pagan worship that went on there, it's a place away from God. And so it's not a good place to be. So it's Gehenna. That's the word that he's using. Just remember that whenever you read in any of the books, anywhere where Jesus is using the word hell, it's talking about Gehenna. It's this physical place. All right? So it's not a place you want to be. Anyway, with that, let's jump into verses 42 to 50 and see what else we can come up with this. Because these are some tough verses. They're not necessarily tough to discern, other than I think the most difficult verses are 49 and 50 to understand exactly what he's getting at. The rest are pretty easy to understand what he's getting at, really hard to implement. That is what makes them difficult verses. You get that finger pointed at you, you get that stabbing. We're all convicted by these verses. If you are not saying that you're not, if you don't see or feel somewhere in your life that you're convicted by these verses, well, I just don't think you're being honest with yourself. I'll be quite blunt. Time for more self-reflection for all of us. So anyway, let's take a listen and see what we can come up with. Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. And if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than with two hands to go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than with 2 feet to be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than with 2 eyes to be thrown into hell, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. For everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if the salt loses its saltiness, how will you season it? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. All right. Salted with fire. Well, we were talking about fire in that Gehenna place, but I think that's probably not exactly what they're getting at. The salt is that which brings flavor to things. Again, those 2 verses I think are ones we can debate a great deal, but we'll just deal with them quickly here. Salt is good, he says, but if the salt has lost its saltiness, how will you season it? Once you've lost your saltiness, once you've lost that what makes you special, the sacredness, how are you going to regain that? We could apply that to many things in life, or purity in life, if we will. We're going to be talking about divorce tomorrow, and there's an element of sexuality to that, of course, obviously. And once you've lost that sexual purity, how are you going to regain that? You can't. Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. It's ready to hold on to that which makes you good. Share your what makes you how you approach life with others, so that they don't fall into sin as well. But be at peace with one another. So let's jump to the other verses. They're again more easy to understand theologically, but worse to try to implement. First of all, when he's talking about all these body parts being hacked off, it's not to be taken literally. You're not supposed to be thinking you're going to go out and physically maim yourself. He is using hyperbole here. He is trying to make a point by going overboard, so to say. Here, you've got something that's causing you to sin. You need to excise it from your life. If there's something that starts to lead you towards sin, something that brings you to whatever temptation it is, and we all have those areas where we are prone to sin, and we all have to be careful. We all need to make sure that we put at risk of stealing a mechanism from the Pharisees. The Pharisees built what they called fences around the law, so they didn't dare go too far and get anywhere near to a sin. Perhaps we need to steal that idea from the Pharisees, and in some areas of our lives, implement some kind of a stopgap so we don't get near enough to the temptation to sin, because we don't want to fall into that. That's what we're saying here. That's what's going to lead to death, because the idea here is that Gehenna is a place that's removed from God. It's a place where they worship Baal. This is a place where you are isolated from God. You're not in communion with God. You are lost, and that's not where you want to be. That's what hell really is not being in the presence of the Lord. I've said that for a long time. We don't really understand hell. A lot of what we imagine for hell, a lot of that is stuff that we get a little picturesque with. Though there is something here about the picturesqueness of the Gehenna, but this is talking about the dump, talking about what's going on there. There are definitely worms eating decaying matter, carbon matter, whatever, organic matter. But the idea is we got to be careful with ourselves, watch ourselves. We want to be watching out for each other, but we need to watch ourselves. And the ones that's the hardest to keep from sinning is you, and for you. Okay, that's the hardest one for us to say we're sinning, because I've got a chart in the other room. It says the severity of everyone else's sin. Oh, that's bad. Well, the severity of my sin is kind of off. It's not even in the screen. It's not so bad. Not a big deal. You know what I'm talking about. But the big thing, back to verse 42, in closing, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. We got to be careful we're not leading those that are young in the faith or his children into a position where they are sinning. And that's something we need to be careful of in the church today, because I do think the church is in a very grave place. Many of the mainline Protestant churches, the Catholic Church as well, we are advocating and what do I want to say, putting our stamp of approval on, to be blunt, the behavior that is not godly, behavior that it leads to sin. In fact, the whole premise of it is sin. And so we're leading people to sin. There's going to be a lot of church leaders that are going to show up and they're going to be handed, here's your millstone, put it on. And that's a darn big one too, by golly. Let's not be having St. Peter walk up the pearly gates and say, wait a minute, stop right there. Here's your millstone. Have a blessed day. Be a blessing to someone today. Don't lead them to sin. If you like these devotions, please like and subscribe. Come on back again. I apologize. This one's a little long. Tomorrow's might be longer. I'm warning you. Take care. God bless. Bye-bye.